COVID recovery and our planet's repair must be the two sides of the same coin. This event is organized by the NGO Committee on Financing for Development, Climate Finance Working Group. The NGO Committee on Financing for Development advocates to end poverty, hunger, and for inclusive economic growth that is environmentally and socially sustainable, ethical, and people-centered. Guided by the Addis Ababa Action Agenda and the Monterrey Consensus, we urge policymakers to support development strategies that end global poverty and advance human rights. We thank the Permanent Mission of Costa Rica and Jamaica to the United Nations for co-sponsoring this side event. We welcome His Excellency Ambassador Rodrigo A. Carazo and His Excellency Ambassador E. Courtney Rattray, permanent representatives of Costa Rica and Jamaica Permanent Mission to the United Nations, respectively. With us this afternoon is our keynote speaker, Ms. Zdenka Piskulich, Executive Director of Costa Rica Por Siempre, Mr. Brandon Hay and Glaston White from Jamaica, both working on Reef Restoration Initiative in Portland Bight Protective Area, one of Jamaica's largest protective area. We also have with us Mr. Paul Smith of the UNEP Finance Initiative and Ms. Martina Dorigo, representing the Adaptation Fund. Taking one of this year's Financing for Development Forum's guiding questions, what are priority policy options and concrete steps to implement in order to drive a sustainable, inclusive, and resilient recovery from the economic downturn caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, leaving no one behind? We hope this event presents a well-rounded perspective why adaptation climate finance targeting nature-based solutions must be prioritized and focused towards a holistic and equitable pandemic recovery that is aligned with the 2030 Agenda and Paris Agreement. As we have stated in the concept paper, the COVID-19 pandemic exposed myriad of weaknesses in the current economic, financial, and political systems. These weaknesses create and perpetuate inequalities in the social economic well-being of humankind. Further, the system as practiced undermines the health of land and water ecosystems and assaults biodiversity so necessary to human life and well-being. Secretary General Antonio Guterres calls all people to take paradigm shift to set a holistic and greener path to post-pandemic recovery. Nature needs a bailout. Making peace with nature is the urgent task of the 21st century. The call for actions from member states and different stakeholders in the ongoing 2021 Financing for Development Forum highlights shift to a robust, green, sustainable, and just post-pandemic recovery. Business as usual approach has no place. National leaders and civil societies are calling for the alignment of post-pandemic recovery with 2030 Agenda and Paris Agreement. Developed nations must deliver the 100 billion annual contributions to the Green Climate Fund, appropriately equally towards mitigation and adaptation finance. Adaptation finance can set us to both short-term and long-term recovery that is decarbonized and respect nature and provide equitable resources to people who are most vulnerable. The call is to put nature at the heart of every decision-making and policies building resilience to the impacts of climate crisis. Financing integrated nature-based solution is a win-win pandemic climate change solution. Our Zoom is set up for further interaction among those who are highly interested in this topic. Please use the chat function to communicate with others, ask important questions to our presenters. This event is being recorded and streamed so that more people can participate. Once again, we want to put nature at the heart of every rights-based economic, political, and social policies towards holistic pandemic recovery that benefits all. We look forward to a very fruitful discussion during this event. We welcome our moderator, Ms. Gail Davis-Carter of the Creators 2020 UN SDGs, one of our organizers of this event. Thank you, Gail. I now give you the floor.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Marby, for the beautiful introduction. Everyone, welcome, and welcome esteemed parties, welcome His Excellencies, and all. We know that nature is at the heart of it. My name is Gail Davis-Carter. I am with Man Up Campaign. We are a youth-led organization that stops gender-based violence. I'm also the co-founder of the Creators 2030 Youth Initiative that utilizes art to find solutions to the Sustainable Development Goals as brought to you by the United Nations. As Marby shared, it is important that we understand the importance of nature-based solutions. And one of our amazing champions for that is His Excellency Ambassador Rodrigo A. Carazo, the permanent representative of Costa Rica and the permanent mission of Costa Rica to the United Nations. His Excellency Rodrigo Carazo, I turn it over to you as one of our great champions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Davis. Always very nice to be with you to share issues and to share purposes with you. And thanks very much for to the NGO Committee on Financing for Development in this working group for climate finance for organizing this very important event. And well, of course, it's always pleasing to work side by side with my very dear friend, Ambassador Courtney Rattray, and his mission of Jamaica. It is my joy sharing at this forum with Courtney, as well as with Glaston White, Brandon Hay, Martina Dorigo, and Paul Smith. But much more so, must I say, from afar, to share with a very dear person, my niece, Zdenka Iskunic, who is on the other side, and who will certainly prove me right of what I have said continuously for many years now, that it is them, the young generation, who knows the answers and who knows how to get us out of this mess that we have made in terms of climate circumstances and biodiversity loss. Thank you, Zdenka, for being with us con mucho cariño y gran emoción de mi parte. That's great emotion on my side to share with her. Let me recall some recent findings. The research from the Nature Conservancy of 2020, done together with 15 other institutions, found that nature climate solutions, including reforestation and coastal restoration, can provide over 1/3 of the cost-effective actions needed to keep global warming below 2%. A review of marine studies found that fully protected marine areas mitigate and promote adaptation to climate change. In particular, well-managed no-take marine protected areas help the marine ecosystem and help people adapt to 5 prominent impacts of climate change: to acidification, to sea level rise, to intensification of storms, to shifts in species distribution, and to the decreased productivity, as well as to oxygen availability and their cumulative effects. Research released in November 2020 by the World Conservation Monitoring Center of the UN Environmental Program found that conserving 30% of land in strategic locations could safeguard 500 gigatons of carbon stored in vegetation and soils, around half of the world's vulnerable terrestrial carnivore stocks, and therefore reduce the extinction risk of nearly 9 out of 10 threatened terrestrial species. The report stressed that coordinating priority areas to conserve both biodiversity and carbon stocks is key in meeting ambitious goals for nature and climate. As we go into 2021, we have to acknowledge once again how decisive it will be in terms of the alignment of ambition and implementation. Whatever is coming in both the FCCC conference of the parties and the convention of biodiversity conference of the parties will be decisive, definitely. Synergies between climate, biodiversity, and sustainable development through nature-based solutions, which is the subject of these conversations, are many. We must refer to a great work done at the United Nations back in 2019, which was with occasion of the Climate Action Summit in September. The work of a stream in which were involved, Costa Rica as well as other countries, found out that there were so many contributions of nature-based solutions for this purpose. The full volume was edited for not only for making the volume, but for making those practices certain and sure in the world. These climate-based solutions are useful, is found in short to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, reduction through fossil fuel phase out, reduction of energy demand, sustainable consumption, sustainable land use, storing carbon to mitigate climate change, maintaining areas of vegetation to protect against higher temperatures, preventing further climate-driven increases in storm severity and frequency, as well as providing a range of other services such as pollination and treatment of pollution. Ecosystems, we know, are generators of livelihood and sustainable business development as well. $100 trillion is annually is its estimated economic value. We have an opportunity to protect and value natural assets and have the resources and the technology necessary, but currently less than 1% of available finance is invested in nature. Nature-based solutions enhance the resilience of our ecosystems and of our societies, which is key for the long-term sustainability of our economies, for our health, our food systems, and even our infrastructure. We're talking about our own survival. Therefore, there should be a absolutely necessary shift in thinking that protecting nature and nature-based solutions are a competition for limited resources. No, protection of biodiversity will have a positive impact on climate change and on climate change. Action on mitigation or adaptation will also have that positive impact on biodiversity, and action on both will accelerate the achievement of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, or at least offset the backward trend that this pandemic has brought upon the world. For Costa Rica, in particularly, perhaps my dear niece will refer some of these aspects. Biodiversity and ecosystems are an integral part of our development agenda. With conservation, we have managed to reverse deforestation, to increase economic growth, and to provide the platform of one of our more important sources of income, which is the tourism sector. People go to Costa Rica to see and to enjoy nature. As a middle-income country, Costa Rica faces financial gaps and challenges. Therefore, we had to come up with creative solutions, taking the responsibility to act accordingly with national policies. We have promoted conservation through innovative financial mechanisms, like the payment for ecosystem services, which have helped to reverse forest loss and preserve biodiversity, while also providing communities and indigenous people with an economic alternative to practices that have degraded and destroyed ecosystems in times past. Now we aim to take into account both the biodiversity loss and the climate catastrophe in measuring microeconomic policy, fiscal planning, budgeting, public investment management, and procurement practices. The science is clear in the interconnectedness between the crises we are facing at a political level, and we are sure that we must engage in increasing our ambition. This is why Costa Rica, France, and the United Kingdom, and plus the other 50 other countries, have committed to champion the goal of protecting at least 30% of the planet's land and ocean by 2030 through the High Ambition Coalition for Nature and People. For an effective implementation, we must harness science, technology, finance, and partnerships. We require more finance, and we require to direct much better those flows towards investments that preserve nature rather than destroy it. We need to create opportunities for entrepreneurs to develop new products and industries aligned to sustainability and to generate low carbon, nature positive markets. We believe in people-led conservation approaches through indigenous and local communities, and especially by empowering women and youth to combat the inequalities and to ensure a just transition. I wish to conclude by saying that investing in protecting nature, places and plants that thrive in nature will get us one step closer to a healthy, stable, and prosperous world, foreseen by our long-sought 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Thank you very much.
Thank you, His Excellency Rodrigo A. Carazo. As always, it is amazing to have you on and for your work. One of the things that we're clear is that Costa Rica has enabled an overall community economy through nature-based solutions that support its biodiversity and overall ecosystem. So thank you for that, sir, and sharing that information with us. Now we will move on to Zdenka Piskulich. She is the Executive Director of Costa Rica por Siempre. Zdenka, we look forward to hearing what you have to share on nature-based solutions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gail. And I will now share my screen. So I hope you can see this. Okay, so I was asked to give a keynote for this webinar. And I thought I'd start with something more inspirational than actually giving a lot of data in terms of the importance of nature-based solutions, which I think we're speaking to a crowd that really understands this. And I wanted to start with one of my favorite quotes, and it's a quote from Maya Angelou, who said, "Do the best you can until you know better. And when you know better, do better." And I think that applies to all of us at a very personal level. For those of us who have been working in conservation for many, many years, we have been learning, and we learn by doing, and in the process we adapt. And sometimes we mess up, and sometimes we learn through our mistakes, and constantly we are learning. And the more we learn, the better we try to do with what we've learned. And the reason I think this is really important is because this applies more than just individually. It really applies to all of us also at institutional level, at national levels, and at a global scale. It seems that as the world evolves, and as policies evolve, and as nature continues its decline, we continue to learn and to adapt and to find the best ways to continue to move forward. So I believe that the word and adaptation, and nature-based adaptation and ecosystem-based adaptation, the word adaptation really applies at many levels to the work that we do, at a personal level, at a national level, institutional level. And when we most learn is when we're at a critical juncture. And that's exactly where we are as humanity. We're at a very critical juncture. Because on one side, we can no longer ignore the risks of not taking action on biodiversity conservation. I don't have to tell you and give you facts that we all have learned through IPBES and IPCC and so many different studies that demonstrate that we are really in the brink of a crisis, of a biodiversity crisis at a global scale. So I don't have to give you that data for you to know that we can no longer ignore that the data exists, that science has told us that we really are at a very critical juncture. And at the same time, we can no longer ignore the link between this environmental degradation and what this is doing in terms of human welfare and how it's impacting all of us. And the title for this specific webinar, which also has to do with COVID, right, and finding ways to repair our planet, really says it all. As humanity evolves and learns from this crisis that we're living, this human crisis, this social crisis, this health crisis, what have we learned, and how can we use that to adapt? So I really feel that that we are at a critical juncture, and that really what this conversation needs to be about is, how do we actually face this critical juncture? What do we do about this? How do we change and evolve as we move forward? And one thing that's very, very clear is that for many policymakers and decision makers around the world, and politicians and leaders to understand this, many times we need to bring this down to the language that they understand, which is economics. And how do we really get the message across that protecting nature and investing in conservation actually makes economic sense? And the facts, again, they're all there. And I don't have to give you all those facts, but just to give you some interesting data. For example, the latest Cambridge report finds that protecting 30% of our planet outweighs the costs, at least 5 to 1. It is so much better or cheaper to protect our planet than it is to not do so. And that after COVID-19, the whole nature sector is projected to grow 4 to 6% per year, compared to 1% for agriculture, timber, fisheries, and other extractive activities. Some other facts that you might want to consider. Just move this here. The McKinsey report that was also recently released also says that protecting 30 by 30 can support 30 million new jobs in ecotourism and sustainable fisheries. It can directly add 650,000 new jobs in conservation management, and it can support $500 billion of GDP. So the numbers are there. The latest Dasgupta report, if you haven't had a chance to look at it, also really speaks to the fact that nature is productive. It's extremely productive, and that it can give a yield of over 20% per year, which is a much bigger rate of return than any other rate of return from the financial sector. So there is natural capital, and investing in natural capital is something that really makes sense. And it makes sense from an economic perspective, if that's the way we need to sell this to leaders and policymakers and decision makers, but it also makes sense in terms of protecting people and protecting nature. So at the end, investing in ecosystem-based adaptation will support resilience to climate change. It will limit some of these climate risks. It will guarantee better livelihoods. It can help prevent future pandemics. It can curb biodiversity loss, and it can also bolster economic growth. To me, it sounds like a win-win from everywhere that we look at it. And yet we're still not there. We're still talking to ourselves and to others and convincing others about the importance of investing in natural capital. So I wanted to give you one example of something that from a very small place here in Costa Rica called Bahia Santa Elena. And the reason I chose this example is because with the COVID-19 crisis hitting as it has, it really had a huge impact in our country. We are a country that depends very much on sustainable tourism, that depends on tourists coming here. When we closed our borders and all of a sudden from one day to another, we had no tourists coming to our country, many things happened. And of course we had, still recovering and still in the midst of an economic crisis caused by this pandemic, as is, and as are most of the countries in the world. But, it is interesting now, 1 year later, to go back and look at, what happened? How did different sectors react to this pandemic, and which ones had the flexibility and the capacity to really navigate through this crisis in a more sustainable way? And surprisingly so, what we have found is that communities who invested in a whole value chain, communities that invested in conservation and looked at conservation throughout their whole economic chain, have fared much better than many large-scale hotels that simply had to close their doors, and from many other business or tourism sector businesses that were not prepared because they really weren't looking at the whole picture. So Bahia Santa Elena is one specific example of how this works. So this is a very small area in northern part of Guanacaste. 3 communities work in this area. We have been working with the community in Bahia Santa Elena in creating a marine management area, marine protected area. And at the beginning, the community was not in favor of this marine protected area. They thought that this would be obviously a limitation to their capacity to fish and to have extractive activities in this area. When the marine management area was created, we promised the community that we would work with them to find a way in which we could demonstrate that creating this marine protected area was beneficial for the community and for the future of this area. And in an area where the people of the community, they call this area the factory of poverty. It's an area where poverty is just a constant cycle, where children need to leave school. Before they finish school, they don't graduate. They end up taking over their parents' jobs, mainly fishing. There's less fish every day. They don't have other opportunities just for economic diversification. And so we started working with the community of Bahia Santa Elena, created the marine protected area with the support of the community, and then developed a business plan. And the difference between this business plan and the typical business plan that we think of when we think about business plans is that the whole business plan was centered not on how we can yield profit for the community only, but on how we can yield profit for natural capital. And by doing so, how can this marine protected area actually benefit the community? Around this business plan, we developed a whole list of economic activities, all the way from how can we shift some of the activities that this community is doing in fishing to tourism? How can we create a new type of tourism for this area based on bringing researchers, on bringing other types of tourists? How can we link to larger tourism facilities in the area? How can we sell what is different from this area from what is happening in other areas? And the case study, of course, is a lot more complex than what I'm saying, but the final final conclusion of what happened is when the pandemic hit, the community was ready. It had the tools, it had the economic diversification. It might not have been receiving tourists, but it had the capacity to work in other areas that had already been identified by this business plan. And while this community continued to thrive through the pandemic, large millionaire hotels in the area had to close their doors. And what really made the difference is investing in the natural capital and understanding the natural capital of this specific community. So this is to say really that, what we have learned throughout many years of working, not only in Costa Rica, but throughout many of the projects in the region is we really cannot look at ecosystems, at people, or at governance if not interconnected. Ecosystems, because we recognize that they're the base, that is the base, that's where nature, that is nature-based solutions, that is how do we make the best use that we can of these ecosystems in a sustainably developed way. Governance, because half of the time we're fighting against our own policies. And at the end, it will only be coherence in policies, the fact that we have enabling conditions as a government that will really make the difference in making ecosystem-based adaptation possible. The other day I was flying over, I was going to the southern part of the country. I was flying over our coastal areas and looking at the expansion of pineapple plantations throughout this whole area. And I was sitting with the Minister of Environment and I was saying, we have to do something about this. We have to find a way to protect these properties. And as I kept on thinking about this, what kept on coming to my mind is, wait a minute, we cannot have government institutions fighting each other off about what makes more sense. Should the Ministry of Agriculture be promoting pineapple, the extension of pineapple farms, while the Ministry of Environment is seeking for more funds to help these coastal communities that are being affected by this? Wouldn't it make sense for the government to have a coherent policy? And when we say this, this is not the Ministry of Environment. This has to come everywhere. The Ministry of Planning, Presidency, all the different ministries. We should not be fighting each other. Government institutions should not be having to compete with each other in terms of moving this forward. And we are spending so much money trying to fix problems that are caused by the same governments. Governments are out there looking for money to fix their own problems that they have created with other policies that they are pushing forward. So at the end, governance is about coherence. It's about ensuring that we're really focusing on a single unifying vision around the need to promote nature-based solutions. And of course, people, because surprisingly enough, and going back to the first quote that I put, it has taken a long time for the conservation movement and for governments and decision makers to really put people at the center of economic growth and of conservation. And when we talk about people, we're talking about interests and beliefs and values and social structures and social inclusion and technical and financial support all throughout the value chain. So at the end, what we're all trying to do is put nature at the heart of a green recovery. And what that means is we really need to work in regenerative development for the people, but also by the people. It is the people themselves who understand the vision of where they want to go, how they want to get there. And if we put this at the heart of the green recovery, then we will be more successful in these efforts. And again, it is not enough to narrow the financial gap. There will never be enough money. I mean, all of the studies demonstrate that we're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars that we need to invest each year in conservation. But if only we were to reduce perverse incentives, this number could be significantly reduced. And of course, at the heart of this, coherence, as I was saying, having coherent policies and coherent visions as governments and at a more global level. And multilateralism, as Don Rodrigo was saying, at this point, there's a huge amount of opportunities that will be coming up. COP26, Biodiversity COP, World Conservation Congress, and so on, G7. And multilateralism must be at the heart of making this possible. And finally, of course, we have to consider sustainability. How do we guarantee that we can do this and in the long term and have a vision of permanence for the efforts that we do? And just to finish off, and these are just photographs of women. As I travel throughout the country, I take photographs of different women who are really trying to make a difference in their communities. These are organic farmers from an area in northern Costa Rica. And the more I visit these places, the more I see how women are taking leadership in their communities, really making a strong difference. And the reason I put this is just to say that at the end, it's all about the people. And what I have learned in my use of this quote and this motto that I try to live by is, it is these people who have the knowledge, the capacity, the strength to make a difference. And it is our responsibility within the institutions that we represent to give them the power to really support this green economic growth, to be able to adapt. Nature-based solutions is a beautiful concept. It's been around for years. We now just have a nice way to phrase it to make sure that it gets the attention that it needs to get at a global level. But people have been doing this for decades, for centuries, and it is our responsibility to continue to help them in doing so. So thank you very much for this space. And thank you to my dear uncle who has joined me in this effort and with whom I share this really important vision. And thank you for this opportunity. I will stop now.
Zdenka, what an amazing presentation. Thank you so much. You have led us to understand the importance of people-centered sustainability within conservation and nature-based solutions, especially around the investment of nature's capital. Thank you for that and reminding us how important that is and how Santa Elena was able to develop a monetary system for itself amongst this COVID and finding other ways of income-based solutions. With that said, we will go on to, of course, His Excellency Ambassador E. Courtney, I hope I'm saying it right, Rattray of Jamaica for the permanent mission of Jamaica to the United Nations, and he is the permanent representative for Jamaica to the United Nations. Sir, we ask that you would take the floor and share your thoughts on nature-based solutions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gail. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Great. Let me just start by thanking my dear friend and colleague, Rodrigo. And let me just say a warm word of welcome to everybody online today. And allow me to just say a special word of welcome to the Jamaican panelists. I hadn't read the program, so I didn't realize until it started that I had one of my comrades in arms from Jamaica with us today. So as we say in Jamaican parlance, big up yourself, Mr. Glaston White. Really good to have you as a fellow panelist today. And Gail, let me just, join with you in thanking Ms. Piskulich for her very interesting, engaging, and informative presentation. That was a real treat to kick us off this afternoon. So let me just say that it's a real pleasure to join you and share with you today Jamaica's perspectives on what I think is a very timely issue of climate adaptation financing with a focus on NBS, on nature-based solutions, as a means, as we heard at the outset, of spurring a resilient and sustainable recovery from COVID. There is an old Jamaican saying, a Jamaican quote-unquote proverb that says, fire there mus tail, him think a cool breeze. And to just translate that to English, there is a fire blowing at the mouse's tail, but he thinks it is cool breeze. And I think this, I think this is appropriate to the situation in which we find ourselves. As Ms. Piskulich just said, we are at a critical juncture. For decades, the world has been relying on nature to provide for its many needs. And I think about my own country of Jamaica. Despite being a small island state, we are endowed with forests that cover 40% of our land. We also have over 100 rivers and streams. I mean, just to give you some example of our size, we are about the size of the state of Connecticut, Jamaica that is. Restoring nature and using it sustainably will, I think, accomplish two things. Firstly, it will help our planet to heal. And secondly, it will serve as a life raft to assist our recovery from this awful pandemic. But for this to happen, it will take three things: commitment, ambition, and thirdly, tangible support. Commitment ensures that action will continue, notwithstanding the significant obstacles. Ambition will ensure that we go beyond the mere minimum by aiming for the sky, and tangible support will be demonstrated by the provision of finance, technology, and technical support. The provision of climate finance for nature-based solutions is critical as it cuts across all three of these actions. We recognize the challenges of financing the preservation of ecosystems. The biodiversity financing gap is estimated at 598 to 824 billion US dollars per year. And because the financing of nature-based solutions is akin to the financing of global public goods, the mobilization of this finance represents, I believe, not just a challenge, a significant challenge. Although nature-based solutions generate economic, social, and environmental benefits, investors have difficulty identifying a monetary return on their investment. Now, this is not to suggest that there aren't instances of private investment in this area. However, examples of private finance that is mobilized at scale are too few and far between. So given this reality, most of the financing for investments in nature-based solutions have come from public finance, whether domestic or international. And I include international public finance because the GCF and several of the MDBs and DFIs are in fact helping in this regard. Just to take the GCF as an example, they're financing initiatives covering forests, mangroves, wetlands, peatlands, and marine and coastal ecosystems. GCF has provided 35 million US dollars to the Blue Action Fund project, which is an ecosystem-based adaptation program in the Western Indian Ocean, where they support local NGOs in marine conservation projects. And I'm talking about projects in countries like Madagascar, Tanzania, South Africa, and Mozambique. From a domestic resource mobilization standpoint, I'm sure you all hear about this acronym DRM, which we like to use. From a DRM standpoint, one can approach the mobilization of public resources in different ways, such as via taxation. There are smart ways of utilizing taxes and levies, which can be designed to encourage certain behavior that we want to see and discourage others. And the best example, or the most well-known example of this that I can think of is the carbon pricing example. I think this is a prime one. For us in the Caribbean, Trinidad and Tobago has a levy on the production of natural gas. As you know, they're a big natural gas producer and exporter. That Rodrigo had mentioned the Nature Conservancy, and together with the WRI, the World Resources Institute, and some others, they estimate that stopping deforestation, restoring forests, and improving forestry practices could remove 7 billion metric tons of carbon dioxide annually. Now, I mean, we don't have any frame of reference, so we don't even know what 7 billion metric tons of carbon dioxide really means. But to just equate it with something that you will know, that's as much as eliminating more than all of the cars that are currently in the world. So yeah, huge. So let me just talk about another financing mechanism that has been in use for some years now, which is debt swaps. Let me talk to you about this because we have done it in Jamaica. That really is where a sovereign debt is bought on the secondary market, for example, by an international organization or a philanthropic investment fund. They buy this typically at a discount, hopefully. The proceeds of the debt servicing that is being made by the country, by the debtor, by the sovereign debtor, is then placed in a fund that the country, the debtor, can then access to invest in climate adaptation. And I mentioned this in particular because we have an outfit in Jamaica called the Environmental Foundation of Jamaica, which was established back in 1991. And it was initially capitalized through what was for us in Jamaica our very first Debt for Nature swap. And the purpose of the EFJ is to channel funds for nature-based solutions to NGOs. And I'm happy to say that it is still funding grassroots and other local entities today. We in Jamaica are committed and ambitious in our climate action, but also in the management of our natural resources. Our updated NDCs signal our commitment to greenhouse gas reductions, which includes nature-based solutions. We have enhanced our NDCs to integrate forests as a means of meeting our emissions targets. Our policy frameworks that guide our strategic planning recognize that the management of these resources is vital, not just over the short and medium term, but long term as well. There is no denying that greater levels of finance and technology transfer are needed to create what we heard initially. I think, can't remember who said it, it may have been Marvy. I think it was Marvy that said we need to create a paradigm shift. And we see the value of utilizing nature-based solutions as critical to our survival, especially as we strategize to recover from COVID and build resilience. And so in this regard, we continue to, number one, advance our 3 million trees over 3 years campaign that was started in 2019. We continue to restore our wetlands, to protect our watersheds through climate smart agriculture, and to pilot more urban ecosystems-based solutions that can be replicated and scaled up. We are also looking at ways to increase the capacity of local government institutions to integrate climate change in their operations. We anticipate that a focus on nature-based solutions in COVID-19 recovery strategies will lead to reduced vulnerability of people who rely on natural resources for protection and for their livelihoods. And ultimately, what we hope for is a more resilient, buoyant, and inclusive economy that is further decoupled from the degradation of the natural environment. 1,000 pardons again for losing you. That's it for me. Thanks so much.
Ambassador, thank you so much for sharing what Jamaica is up to, especially where you are integrating climate change into the local government level. That is really important to know that government is really taking it on at that level and you're implementing it into that area that really supports the people of your country. Not to mention what you're doing with advancing with 3 million trees as well. Thank you so much for sharing that, Ambassador. As we move on to the next level, we'd like to thank E. Courtney Rattray for being with us. And as he said, we'll give a big up to Alan Kalish, who will also bring on Mr. Donovan Brandon Hay and Mr. Glaston White. We will start with Mr. Glaston White and Alan Kalish. Alan, please take the floor. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gail. If I may, perhaps we can start with Mr. Hay. We're having connection problems with Mr. White. Mr. Hay, would you like to present, please?
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for the opportunity to present here. My name is Donovan Hay. I'm the scientific officer for an environment and development non-government organization called CCAM, for Caribbean Coastal Area Management Foundation. And we work in the Portland Bight area of Jamaica on the south coast. And part of what we do has to do with the management of this largest protected area in Jamaica, known as the Portland Bight Protected Area. And as an environment and development NGO, we spend a lot of time working with user groups, doing co-management of natural resources. And I have a presentation that I'd like to share if I can. I don't know if you can see my screen. Okay, So the project is, it's a national project. However, it's a partnership of a number of agencies all around the island, of which CCAM is one. So I wanted to spend a moment or two setting some of the background. We're an archipelagic state, of course. We have a very large marine area that we are responsible for. And as you can see from the map, the familiar outline of Jamaica does not fully encompass the area that we are responsible for. And most of that area is marine space, and fishing is vital. It's an important economic activity and usually involves some of the poorest people in our society. The fishery in Jamaica is largely artisanal, meaning it's small scale. It's a few men in a tiny boat going out to sea with their traps and their lines to harvest and selling their fish at the end of the day. Most of the fish that we are catching and consuming is reef-based fish. And that's important because that means that the health of the reef is vital to the survival of the fishery. And as I said, most of the fishers are among the lowest economic group in Jamaica, but it's not just the fishers, of course, that are depending. There's a whole industry that involves the net menders and the vendors and all the other people who receive an income directly or indirectly through this industry. Unfortunately, Jamaica is one of the more overfished countries in the Caribbean region. And our reefs have been in decline since the 1980s. Prior to that, the pressures of pollution and overfishing had been growing and had reached critical point. However, it was when we started to experience environmental shocks like a series of hurricanes, as well as epidemics, coral diseases, and the great sea urchin die-off in the early 1980s, that we began to realize that our reefs were not recovering, and they actually continued to decline. And since then, most of our reefs have undergone this ecological phase shift, where they've gone from coral-dominated reefs with a very high productivity and lots of fish to algae-dominated reef, dominated almost exclusively by herbivores that are trying to consume and keep abreast of the fish. So our fishery is, in fact, very depleted. In fact, most of the fish that are harvested are juveniles that have yet to reproduce. And so we have a problem in maintaining the productivity of the industry. Much of the carnivorous fish, the snappers and the groupers, are largely absent from the reefs. And we, as I said, we mostly have herbivores that are there consuming these vast quantities of algae that are overgrowing the reef. And this, of course, a lower quality fish has a lower value in the market. The taste is different. And so the income that the fishers can earn is also reduced from that fact alone. And that has been forcing a lot of fishers to turn to using more environmentally damaging techniques to fish. They're reducing the size in their traps and their nets. They're using drag nets. Some of them are spearfishing at nighttime, even though that has now thankfully been banned. The government has placed a ban on spearfishing at nighttime. And some people are also illegally using dynamite to catch fish. So in order to address these problems, the government decided that they want to create a national system of no-take sanctuaries all around the island. However, they wanted to do was to partner with local groups, NGOs, community groups, CBOs, and even commercial groups in some cases, to do the underground management of these sanctuaries. So the day-to-day management is done by groups like ourselves, CCAM. We actually manage 3 of the 16 areas all around Jamaica, the 3 that are located within the area that we work, the Portland Bight Protected Area. And the partnership, as I said, includes NGOs. It also includes government agencies such as the Coast Guard and the Marine Police. The Fisheries Authority, of course, is our principal link with the government. And there are even local landing site-based fisher folk organizations that have become involved in doing this management. But in order to do that, the government has, in fact, since 2011, been signing official agreements, MOUs with the partners, and providing a subvention that for the most people have been covering their core operating costs, or at least part of their operating costs, that would allow them to hire staff, keep their offices open, do patrols, and do some amount of monitoring. Almost all sanctuaries have then been able to leverage the funding that the government has been able to provide. And many of us have more than doubled the investment in fishery through projects that we have funded with partner donor agencies, both local and international, such as EFJ, such as the GEF, et cetera, et cetera. And so a lot of us have brought additional financial value into the system, but certainly our commitment as local persons to the sanctuaries in our own area has been extremely high. And persons have, even during this time when wages have been cut, some people have been working for half pay, some people have volunteered their time when monies are not available. There's a very high level of commitment on the part of the partners to maintain this system, because they are already seeing some of the benefits. This is a map of the Jamaica, giving you an idea of where around the island most of these sanctuaries, and you can see there's a fairly even distribution all around the island. My area of focus is down on the south central area in Portland Bight, where we have those 3 sanctuaries, Salt Harbor, Gallen Harbor, and the 3 bays. And our fisheries experts have told us that in order to have a sustainable harvest, we need to be putting somewhere between 20 and 40% of the fishing grounds in these no-take zones. Unfortunately, we have been unable to attain that, even though because we are so overfished, we probably need to attain more than just the minimum 20% in protection in order to give the fishery space to recover. However, we have yet to attain that 20% mark. In fact, we're probably somewhere now staying around the 5% mark. However, with what we have, we've had some remarkable successes. Many of the sanctuaries have been able to demonstrate increases in fish biomass and density and diversity, not to mention coral cover and coral diversity as well. In some cases, up to 1,000% or 10-fold increase in the diversity and biomass of fish within the first 5 years has been achieved in some sanctuaries. And in order to, some of the activities that we participate in include additional to just enforcement and protecting the no-take zone from fishing pressure. Many of us have gone into coral gardening and transplantation. We've gone into putting in artificial reefs and doing invasive species control, such as lionfish. And environmental monitoring is a normal part of what we do, such as water quality monitoring, monitoring erosion of the beaches, et cetera, et cetera. And so the value added that having NGOs and small groups around the island with capacity in hand to do environmental management has been has provided a real multiplier effect to us. Environmental public education has also been a big part of what we do on a daily basis. I have some slides showing pictures of the team at work, some of us doing trapping for sampling for monitoring purposes, measuring fish, monitoring beaches. This is some pictures from our artificial reef program. You can see what the structures look like. They're simple structures made out of steel, but when they are put in the sea, they really attract huge quantities of fish, especially when they are placed in the sanctuaries where the juvenile fish that become attracted to the structures are able to grow and mature and reproduce, possibly before they migrate out onto the reefs. Coral nurseries, many of us have gone into propagating coral species that are fast growing to help to replant out on the natural reefs as well as the artificial reefs to boost the ability of the reefs to reproduce and to provide adequate habitat for the marine species, not just the fish, but the entire trophic system. So since 2011, when the project began, funds were provided through the Fisheries Management and Development Fund, which is a fund that the government created using capital from a levy that they had imposed on the export of conch. Jamaica is one of the largest exporters of conch in the world. Most of the conch comes from the offshore banks, and a small percentage of those funds was put into the development fund, and that has been providing. However, in 2018, we suffered a collapse in the population, and the government felt that they needed to close the fishery for a period to allow the conch stocks to recover. Since then, that fund has been depleted. And by 2019, the government was having severe troubles maintaining their commitment to fund, and some payments were late and some payments were reduced, and there was a great period of uncertainty. And of course, I'm talking about 2019. This, of course, is the period when the COVID-19 pandemic really took hold. And that, of course, has greatly exacerbated the problem. The government is now already having limited funds, already facing difficulty with the conch stocks and the decline in the industry. Now having to divert so much of its resources away to deal with this pandemic, and there are lots of uncertainties going forward. We really have invested so much on the part of the government, and this has been has cut across party lines in Jamaica. You know, both parties, when they've been in government, have strenuously supported and taken ownership of this very unique program, and the value added that it has provided to Jamaica has been tremendous, which is why they have been so keen to support it. But as things continue to get worse, you know, we have climate change causing increased mass mortality to the coral reef. Managers are trying to manage the reefs to build in resilience. However, the poor state of the fisheries mean that for us to have any hope of recovery, it's essential that we are able to continue a program such as this. You know, it's a national program. There are lots of partners who will not be able to maintain their support without the government subvention, let alone the additional support they've been able to get from our many local and international partners. And this lack of funding is liable to severely reduce our ability as a country to do any kind of fisheries management at a time when all of these interventions are so vital. We're facing climate change, and so many of our people are dependent for their economic and social well-being on this important industry, that if we are unable to maintain it, that there could be some severe repercussions. And so impact of further collapse on the fishery must be realistically accounted. There are lots of times when there is a temptation to sort of look at what has already been spent on the part of the government and say, we've spent so many millions and we're not sure what we're getting for it, because it's difficult sometimes to quantify all of the benefits that has come from a sort of multifaceted, multi-program effort such as this. And many of us don't have the resources and the expertise to kind of put that into financial terms that can justify in pure dollars and cents to policymakers why this is so important. I can talk forever about coral reefs and people, but sometimes you need the financial explanation to make it simpler for planners and for partners to understand, you know, the mathematics behind this particular program and how important it is and what a tremendous return on investment we have and can bring. And so I'd like to cut my presentation there and thank you all so much for the opportunity. I'll be very keen to work with any partner who is willing to provide expertise or financial support to ourselves, at CCAM, or to the program at large. But this is truly a program I have committed my career to. It is very unique that our government would maintain such a partnership, and it speaks to the benefits that they clearly have seen and would like to continue. So I would like to send an appeal out and to thank the organizers for this opportunity and honor to share this program with you.
Thank you.
Mr. Hay.
Thank you, Brandon. Thank you for all the time you spent preparing for the conference today. Much appreciated. It was very informative. Thank you. If I may, at this point, I must say that we've been unable to connect with Mr. Glaston White. Mr. White.
Here. I am
Oh,
here.
you're here. Beautiful. Okay. If I may then continue. Mr. White, what do you do for a living?
Well, I'm a fisherman, and I choose to volunteer to represent fisher folk locally and regional.
And how long have you been doing this kind of work?
Well, I've been fishing since 2000, and I've been representing fisher folks through organizations since 2005.
Okay. And if I may ask, at the present time, are you able to make a living?
Well, I can say yes, but at a minimal level compared to what the bills is coming to and what you're making, you know, it's very stressing because of, as you know, the pandemic that is happening and based on the protocol that is being put in place by the government, which earlier on had a strain on fishermen, but there was some relief earlier this year. But yes, we can survive in terms of trying to cover our expenses. But and I don't think majority of the fishers, based on their location and what is happening now, would be able to say the same thing, knowing that their customer base have been cut totally off.
Mr. White, may I ask you, what's the relationship from your point of view between coral reefs and the ability to catch fish?
Well, the coral reef provide the target species that we fishers depend on, right? While we work together with NGOs and other established groups to identify some of these reefs which is close to the land side as protected area, nursery area. The ones that we consider as our fishing ground, you find that they have been damaged through, it will be caused by pollution at times, the effect of climate change and natural disaster, as you know, basically would push these grounds to be bared based on the type of species that we target, right? And sometimes you find that based on what is happening, you find more people coming into the fisheries, more unregulated fishers coming on board, so it makes it more difficult for you to find your stock that you're out there for. And as Brandon has highlighted earlier on, Jamaica, as you know, is one of the most overfished countries within the Caribbean. So, we as the fishers can tell you that's a true based on what we are experiencing out there.
Can you talk about the fisher folk organizations that you are involved in and your role in those organizations?
Well, yes. I'm a part of at the primary level, which is the Half Moon Bay Fishermen's Cooperative. That's a grassroots organization, community-based, which I'm the PRO on that board. I'm also a part of the national organization, which is the Jamaica Fishermen's Cooperative Union, which I'm the treasurer on that board, right? And also on a regional level, I sit on a regional board, which is the Caribbean Network of Fisher Folk Organization, right? And I'm the general secretary on that. And that group is made up of fishers from the 17 CARICOM countries, members and member states, and it's solely made up of fisher folks.
And your position with respect to these fisher folk organizations is paid or voluntary?
Based on what is happening, when you're a part of an NGO like this, it's voluntary, so at all level, I'm a volunteer, not paid. So it's as a volunteer. So you have to love this work, love to help fishers, love to represent your fishers to be doing this work.
Have you attended any fisher folk meetings lately?
Yes, I've been attending meetings on all three levels. As you know, based on the pandemic now, most of our meeting will be online. But for our primary co-op, we have been meeting. We are now in the process of organizing our annual assembly, And for the national organization, based on the number of board members, which is in the requirement of the COVID protocol here in Jamaica, we can meet face to face. So yes, we have been meeting, and we have to be meeting based on what is facing our fishers locally, in terms of seeing how best we could work with the government assistance that is being provided and allowing our fishers to get access to it.
What are the prominent issues that the fisher folk are speaking about at the recent meetings?
Well, right now, apart from the high cost of going to sea and not be able to cover your expense going to sea, it's also about what is happening now in the pandemic with COVID-19, and the chain within the fishing link has been broken because the customer base and the protocol that is set out, prevents that gathering. So the fish market or fish vendors and so forth, they are feeling it. The fishermen, in terms of the customer base and how they used to sell their catch, that has to be changed now. And there was no preparation with them for this type of situation, which we are now promoting online sale, promotion online, using of bank information and so forth. So it's a long way to go to get them well equipped to do this type of transaction with their customer. But it's an issue how to get their products sell locally to the local consumer. Right, is the main issue, and because of that, it costs a lot of fishers, as we would say, getting bankrupt, right? Because you're investing and not seeing any return at this time. And whatsoever bailout is available through the government, it's not sufficient enough to really, make a dent. And as you know, fishers have their vessels and equipment that can't be licensed and insured. So, during these times, damages and so forth can hardly be repaired. Right? So those are some of the main issues that we are having here as fishers.
There's been lockdowns in your local area. To what extent has that impeded fisher folk?
Yes. Well, I can give you an idea of the setting of Jamaica. On the south coast of the island is where you find majority of the fishing activities and the fishing communities, right? And the fishing grounds as well. On the north coast, that's where the tourism sector is located. So what you find during the lockdown for last year, we were impacted in the sense that there was no movement of fishers from home to fishing landing site or underwater. You were not supposed to be seen underwater or moving at that. A minimal compensation came through the government at that aspect, but in my view and the view of our local fishers, the grassroots level, it was not dealt with as though it was supposed to. And based on the allocation, it's a joke comparing to what a fisher would be making and the expense for a week. So those are some of the main issues for the south coast, right? But I should say, since lobbying with government, meeting with different agencies, the government has now have fishers, licensed registered fishers, as an essential service now. So we are now able to move around. We are now able to go to sea and fish, providing you have proper documentation. So it's a plus from what was happening last year.
And just to, if you can elaborate in terms of the persons that people you work with, do you work with scuba divers?
We work with all type of fishermen, fisher folk, fish vendors. It's an industry that we have to be interactive with all level of people. And yes, we do. We are for JSU that I represent, which is the national organization. We provide gears and equipment for fishers which fishing different type of techniques of fishing, net, trap, and scuba. But based on the intervention of research and the government and other stakeholders, we are seeing where a ban need to be put on the night using of scubas. So while we provide gears and equipment for them, it's only authorized for to be used within the days, but not in the night, which becomes an enforcement issue.
Are you involved in any way in teaching local school children about the work that you do with respect to coral reef rehabilitation?
Yes, and I would say since the past 5 years, at the national level and on a regional level, we have implemented in our work plan to have youths, and especially from the school level, involved in the awareness of fishing. So while we have workshops and so forth, which will suit the level of youths, we invite them. We have show and tell for the younger children, and educate them about the interests of fisher folk, because enough of our fishermen, they have kids and a lot of kids. So, I think educating them on the right policies should start from their kid, so that's an avenue that we take. So yes, we work with school children, and at the university level as well, we provide a lot of information for final year SPAs, projects, and so forth. I'm personally one of those persons who at numerous times been interviewed for my role in fishing and so forth for school projects.
And you work closely, or I apologize, do you work at all with Mr. Brandon Hay?
Yes, and to lay out that clear, I'm a part of an organization which is administered by CCAM, which is the Portland Bight Fisheries Management Council. Brandon A. and Ms. Parchment, who is a key figure in that organization, which is made up of fisher folk within the Portland Bight protected area. We at the community level deal with the community management, and at a monthly level we meet at the head office of CCAM, which we deliberate what to do next and so forth. So we work very closely with them, and they work closely with all level of fishers, not just within Portland Bight, but all across Jamaica through assistance and workshop programs.
Weston, is there anything else you'd like to say on behalf of the fisher folk that you represent?
Well, I first and foremost, I would like to thank you guys for the opportunity, this panel, for having a fisher to express what is happening within the grassroots level. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. It's just that the voice of the fishers, which I was asked to elaborate on, is that we endorse all projects that is being filtered down to us in terms of workshop sensitization through climate change, reef restoration, and so forth. But we are yet to see the implementation of some work being done at the grassroots level. I mean, a lot of time fishers leave a workshop, they are knowledgeable of what was taught and know what to do, but funding need to be available to implement some of these things so as for us who attend workshop to be trainers of other personnel coming into the industry. But I thank you guys who is the decision makers for having me here. I wish I can be invited for more of these forums so as to have the traditional view, the grassroots view being spoken. So that's my take. Thank you very much, guys.
Glaston, may I say that we've spoken a number of times already, and yes, I know this has taken a toll on you to get prepared for today's conference. So on behalf of our working committee, we'd like to thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah, man. Thank you very much, man. Thank you very much. And as I said, on a regional level, through the CNFO, we have been working in terms of educating our fishers. The only challenge is getting the grant funding to do some implementation work. So wherever it can be accommodative for the Caribbean region to see how we can implement some structural development. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Alan Kalish for bringing on Glaston White and Mr. Donovan Brandon Hay, especially hearing from from His Excellency E. Courtney Rattray, speaking on how the importance of NGOs facilitate their fisheries and on-the-ground learning, to learning it from Mr. Brandon Hay himself, who is an NGO facilitating, even gardening of coral reefs and so on, to hearing from the fisherman, Mr. Glaston White himself, sharing the importance of getting their product to market during this lockdown, how the pandemic has affected them, and the importance of the implementation of structures on the grassroots level. We really thank you, Alan, Glaston, and Brandon, for bringing us this information and the importance of everyone around the world hearing you right now. Now we are going on to move on to Ms. Martina Dorigo of the Adaptation Fund with the World Bank. Martina, would you please take it away? Thank you so much, everyone.
Good morning and good afternoon to everyone. I think that Queen will share the screen. Thank you. Thank you to the NGO Committee on Financing for Development, to the Permanent Mission of Costa Rica to the United Nations, and the Permanent Mission of Jamaica to the United Nations for the organization of this event and for inviting the Adaptation Fund. It's a pleasure to participate. My name is Martina Dorigo and I work in the Adaptation Fund Board Secretariat in the project team. And actually, I'm now temporarily working from Costa Rica, which is a champion in forest conservation and ecosystem-based adaptation practices. Next slide, please. The Adaptation Fund is set up under the Kyoto Protocol of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. It was established in 2001 to finance concrete climate change adaptation projects and programs in developing countries, parties to the Kyoto Protocol, and now also parties to the Paris Agreement, because since January 2019, the Adaptation Fund has been serving the Paris Agreement. The Adaptation Fund is the pioneer of the direct access finance modality, which means that accredited entities at national level, like NGOs, ministry, and government agencies, can directly access climate funds and are responsible for the oversight of a project. Now a total of 50 implementing entities, which can be national, but also regional and multilateral, like UN agencies, multilateral development banks, implement 121 projects, of which 35 are in least developed countries and 21 in small island developing states. The difficult time this year, related also to the pandemic outbreak, show that the support is needed more than ever, because the pandemic put further stress on the resilience of the most vulnerable communities affected by climate change, which have limited resources to respond to compound risks. Considering these challenges, the Adaptation Fund Board has approved in October 2020 a set of measures as immediate actions to mitigate the effects of the pandemic on its portfolio. In line with the increasing urgency of tackling climate change, the Adaptation Fund investments increased and amount to almost $1 billion. In addition, the Adaptation Fund Board took a week ago a monumental decision to double the amount of the country cap to 20 million per country and to increase the number of national implementing entities that can seek accreditation to 2 per country. Next slide, please. Climate change adaptation metrics are fundamental to see what are the targets achieved through the finance project. The Adaptation Fund results framework includes 8 key outcomes and associated outputs. And one of these outcomes focuses on increasing ecosystem resilience in response to climate change and variability, and its associated output measures the number of natural resources assets created, maintained, or improved to withstand conditions resulting from climate change. Up to date, the project approved by the Adaptation Fund Board benefited a total of 19 million beneficiaries. More than 400,000 hectares of natural habitats have been protected or restored, and more than 161,000 meters of coastline have been protected, also through soft or green measures like mangrove restoration or palm plantation. Next slide, please. All the Adaptation Fund projects are country-driven and tailored to local adaptation needs and need to be aligned with the NDCs, climate policies and strategies, and NAPA. Climate change adaptation concept is wide and encompasses many different focus areas or sectors. Despite ecosystem-based adaptation projects account for about 4% of the total portfolio, it is estimated that approximately 67% of the Adaptation Fund funded projects include an output or activities focusing on nature-based solution, even though they are not categorized as ecosystem-based adaptation projects. As ecosystem-based adaptation cuts across a variety of sectors, as it was mentioned before, such as forest, water management, for example, regulating water flows, soil erosion, but also food security, for example, improving soil fertility, but also in terms of urban development. That can be urban cooling, sustainable urban spaces, greening urban spaces, etc. Next slide, please. Now let me offer you a few examples of projects implemented by implementing entities and focusing on ecosystem-based adaptation. This project is implemented in Cambodia by UNEP, it offers a nature-based solution approach to climate change, which was also showcased in the 2020 Adaptation Gap report by UNEP. So in Cambodia, rural communities are experiencing decreasing agricultural productivity because of erratic rainfalls due to climate change. And so they are relying on forest ecosystems for food and income. As a result, there is a degradation of Cambodian forest, which is reducing the ability of these agricultural communities to adapt by speeding the erosion of soil needed to grow crops. The objective of this project is to increase food supply and reduce soil erosion in the community protected areas by restoring a variety of plant species in more than 2,000 hectares of degraded forest, planting of multi-use tree species that will enhance crop productivity. The project entails the implementation of eco-agriculture concept to build the resilience of rural Cambodian communities living in protected areas. The eco-agriculture concept employs an approach to nature resource management that seeks to sustain agriculture and food production, but conserve also biodiversity and ecosystem and support local livelihoods. Next slide, please. Another project deploying nature-based solution is implemented in Honduras. The objective of this project is to increase climate resilience in the most vulnerable communities in the Central Forest Corridor, with emphasis on securing livelihoods and the continued provision of ecosystem goods and services. On-the-ground adaptation measure for forest, land, and water resource management deploying nature-based solutions include reforestation of pine and mixed forest areas damaged by drought-induced pest and fire hazard, but also introduction of protection measures against fire, pest, and land use change and unsustainable forest use to assist in natural generation of forest, and also the implementation of drought management adaptation measures to optimize the use of water resources for agriculture and domestic use. Next slide, please. Finally, another example of a project in ecosystem-based adaptation is implemented in Djibouti by UNDP. A priority area of concern in Djibouti is that of water availability, which is the main limiting factor of agricultural productivity and livelihood security. Therefore, the objective of the project is to diversify and promote climate-resilient agro-pastoral activities in rural Djibouti. This will be achieved by securing sustainable access to water resources through nature-based solutions like the development of shade gardens to support diversified and climate-resilient agro-pastoral production system. These systems are stimulated also beyond the project lifetime through the development of adaptation microfinancing services that provide sustainable financial means and incentives for rural communities. These are just a very few examples, but I could go on just briefly mentioning, for example, the project implemented by Fundo de Cooperación para el Desarrollo Sostenible in Costa Rica, which focuses on restoring diversified production systems to enhance food security in Valle de la Estrella, which is a Caribbean region. It is also strengthening farming productivity through climate resilient agricultural and livestock practices, and it's restoring national coastal protection, adaptive fishing practices, and is undertaking coral colony restorations in the Pacific coast. Next slide, please. Briefly, before ending the presentation, it is important to mention that the Adaptation Fund medium-term strategy includes 3 pillars, which are the pillars of action, innovation, and learning and sharing. Under the innovation theme, the Adaptation Fund Innovation Facility was established with the objective of rolling out successful innovation or scaling up viable innovation. The innovation grants at the innovation facility are of 2 types: small grants up to $250,000 US, which are given to national implementing entity, but also are given to all the organizations that are not accredited with the fund, which can be women associations, academic associations, NGOs, and so forth, and are given through the Adaptation Fund Climate Innovation Accelerator called AFSIA, which is administered jointly by UNDP and UNEP in collaboration with CTCN. So these innovation grants can be used to address adaptation challenges in various thematic areas, including but not limited to advancement of gender equality, disaster risk reduction, inclusion of youth, nature-based solution, and water resource management, among others. So let me conclude by saying that the Adaptation Fund is fully prepared to help developing countries in a COVID-19 recovery that is green and resilient. With that, I conclude my presentation, and I thank you all again for this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Mr. Rigo, for such an amazing and clear presentation. If I may bring the 2 together, what we get clear here is the Adaptation Fund is prepared to deal with a post-COVID, well, I guess you could say during and post-COVID-19 situation that allows for them to provide funding to even such fishermen as we just spoke to Mr. Glaston White, and in areas with CCAM as we talked to Mr. Brandon Hay. So I thank you for Mr. Rigo for making this so very clear and how we can scale up those innovations on the ground. So now we're going to turn over to Mr. Paul Smith, who is with UNEP Finance Initiative. And Mr. Smith, we give you the floor, sir. Thank you so very much.
Thank you so much, Gail. I hope you can all hear me, and I hope I still have time. Last but not least, as they say. One thing just before I go ahead, and one benefit of coronavirus, if it can be called that, is the fact that on a cold Wednesday evening in Switzerland, I can listen to directly the stories of fishermen such as Glaston and Brandon, who supports these initiatives in Jamaica on the other side of the Atlantic. So this is really a fantastic, and helps me connect from my day job talking with banks and investors with real issues on the ground. So thank you so much for this this discussion. Thanks also to my other fellow panelists. So I'd just like to start with a little bit of background. I work for the Finance Initiative at the United Nations Environment Programme, as Gail has said, otherwise known as UNEP-FI. We're a partnership between UNEP and around 350 private sector banks, insurers and investors to mobilize private sector finance for sustainable development. And currently, our work focuses on 3 main areas: SDGs, land and marine ecosystems, and climate change. Now, I work for the climate team on the adaptation side, of course. And in terms of climate change, we've seen considerable changes in the past 2 years from these financial institutions. who are increasingly aligning with the goals of the Paris Agreement. With the support of UNEP-FI, for example, 35 very large institutional investors and 38 banks have committed to aligning their business with the Paris Agreement of well below 2 degrees rise in global warming. But despite these strong commitments from leading financial institutions, as we're all aware here, the climate emergency is here and it's accelerating. Last year saw a record-breaking Atlantic hurricane season, as my colleagues there in Jamaica and Costa Rica only too well know, and that directly affects communities, economies, and ecosystems throughout the Caribbean. And this really is just the one hazard, and is the tip of the iceberg for the future that we see from climate change. Last year also saw the outbreak of the coronavirus pandemic, as we were all too well aware as well. The clear message from this pandemic is that resilience has been catastrophically undervalued. Our failure to properly value social and ecological resilience means that future shocks from pandemics, natural disasters, and of course climate change will be more disruptive and their impacts deeper. Another key lesson in the spread of this zoonotic pathogen has been the failure to respect nature and create space for fragile ecosystems. It's this undervaluation of resilience that we need the finance sector to focus upon. One of our partners in the finance space, Carbon Brief, which is a leading think tank, has estimated that economic losses as a result of just a 2 degrees rise in temperature will be 13% of GDP per capita by 2100, with a disproportionate impact on middle and lower income countries. So that means just with a 2 degrees rise, even if we meet the goals of the Paris Agreement, and that is far from certain, climate change will still have an enormous impact, and adapting to a changing world will be absolutely essential. My own organization, UNEP, launches every year an adaptation gap report, which has estimated that this year adaptation costs will be in the region of $140 to $300 billion annually by 2030 for lower income countries. And public financing in these countries is far from sufficient to meet those costs in the future. International climate finance, such as from the Adaptation Fund, can help to meet that gap, but can only go so far. So private finance will be absolutely key in meeting this gap. But what will it take to guide private finance towards more adaptation? Well, my own organization, UNEP-FI, published a study along with the Global Center on Adaptation in 2019 to look at the main barriers to scaling up finance for adaptation. And just to summarize, the recommendations can be placed perhaps into 3 main areas. First of all, awareness and capacity. Secondly, risk assessment and management. And finally, demonstrating impact. But let's just focus on the second and third of those recommendations. So risk assessment and management. Financial institutions respond to financial incentives. That's their bread and butter. And in order for them to build resilience to climate change, we must have the analytical tools to assess the financial impact of increasing natural hazards over the next 10, 20, 30 years and beyond. Translating these risks into financial risks will directly impact on how the financial industry responds to these climate change risks. This is why UNEP-FI has supported the recommendations of the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, or TCFD for short, since their launch in late 2017. This task force, set up by the Financial Stability Board in 2016, established a framework for businesses and financial institutions to assess climate risks using forward-looking scenario analysis and to manage those risks throughout an institution from the board level down through target setting and annual reporting. UNEP-FI has helped over 100 institutions from banking, insurance and investment to pilot this framework since 2018 to help them build a picture of the risks from the physical and transition impacts of climate change and how to manage them. Furthermore, UNEP-FI is part of a coalition to establish a task force for nature-related financial disclosures, which will help corporates and financial institutions understand the impact of biodiversity loss and ecosystem degradation on their businesses. While this framework is currently in its early stages, we hope that this new framework will build on the experience of the TCFD, and ultimately a holistic climate and environmental risk framework will be developed that can highlight the advantages of seeing risk management not only through a financial lens, but also through a climate and an environmental and ecosystem lens. In terms of the third recommendation of our report, which looks at impact and how we can demonstrate that, how can financial institutions demonstrate not just risk management, but also real action on the ground? Not only to build resilience to climate change, but also to integrate sustainability and ecosystem co-benefits. At UNEP FI, we've been working with financial institutions to integrate nature-based solutions to climate adaptation through a range of approaches. Insurance is perhaps the first good example. Insurance has a potentially major role to play in adaptation, given that insurers and reinsurers already have models that are designed to measure and price risk from natural catastrophes. UNEP FI's Principles for Sustainable Insurance have been working with some of our members, such as Swiss Re, to pioneer the development of ecosystem restoration services. And one good example there, and where this kind of service started, would be in the Yucatan in Mexico, where discounted insurance premiums are offered where tangible efforts are made to protect the coral reefs that protects the coast from storm surge and sea level rise, as we've seen from the witnesses in Jamaica. We have Brandon and Glaston talking about the importance of coral reefs for coastline protection. PSI, which is our insurance branch, is also exploring options to support a similar scheme known as the Restoration Insurance Service Company for Coastal Risk Reduction, or RISCO. And their concept is to restore and conserve mangrove habitats in vulnerable coastal areas in the Philippines and in Brazil. A second strand of our impact work in this area is biodiversity and land use. UNEP have been instrumental in establishing funds to support sustainable agricultural practices with considerable co-benefits, including biodiversity restoration and sustainable forestry, which in turn increase environmental resilience to climate change. One third area that we've been looking at is risk-based mechanisms. In this area, we've been partnering with the Coalition for Climate Resilient Investment, which is a global initiative to price future climate risk into major capital investment projects, such as ports, roads, railways, water treatment works, etc. Part of the outputs of this program will assess systemic risk from climate hazards, such as flooding and storm surge, in a set of pilot countries to measure the resilience of their infrastructure networks. The first of these country pilots is taking place in Jamaica. And UNEP FI is right now working on a second pilot to test this approach in Egypt. One of the main outputs of this approach will be an assessment of adaptation options for infrastructure, including nature-based solutions, which of course have a much lower carbon footprint than hard adaptation solutions and have numerous co-benefits in terms of biodiversity, pollution, and even maintenance costs. So just to conclude, we're still very, very far from scaling the finance necessary for adaptation and indeed scaling awareness of nature-based solutions. But perhaps with this three-pronged approach, raising awareness with financial institutions, developing risk assessment tools, and even mandates, as some countries are implementing now, and demonstrating impact in these areas, we may have a chance to deliver a sustainable response to climate change and to maximize the co-benefits from nature-based solutions. So thank you all for listening to my brief presentation. And if you have any questions, please contact me on either LinkedIn, or I'll put my email in the chat box on the right-hand side here. Thank you so much, Gail.
Thank you so much, Paul. It was an excellent presentation of how you just brought everything together. And so we really want to thank each and every one of the esteemed panelists, and also His Excellency Rodrigo Corazzo and His Excellency E. Courtney Rattray. I would like to just sum up a few things that we learned from this. And if there's any questions, please put them in the chat and we will definitely get to them. What we learned from His Excellency Rodrigo Corazzo is the importance and the commitment that Costa Rica really has to the people of Costa Rica and economic-based solutions with climate innovation, which supports their biodiversity and their ecosystem while supporting their community, generating income if we can be direct in that way. Then we went on to Zdenka Piskulich, we went on to Zdenka Piskalic, who was amazing in what she shared about Bahia Santa Elena, where this is where we can actually see that the Costa Rica government is actually on the ground working with their NGOs. In this small community where poverty was a constant, they used a case study that would allow investment into natural capital. What this provided was an opportunity to have other forms of tourism, like researchers coming in and so forth. And then when COVID-19 came, it also allowed this community to still continue to generate an income that would not have been present before had not Zdenka been involved with that. We went on to His Excellency Ambassador Courtney Rattray, which I would like to share something that he said here, which is there's a fire burning at the mouse's tail, but he thinks it's freezing. I think that was so apropos in the work that Jamaica itself is doing with regard to ensuring that NGOs are on the ground and their support of NGOs on the ground and the financing that they're providing to NGOs on the ground to support fishermen, to support the resilience of their coral reefs, the restoration of their coral reefs, their mangroves, and so forth. And then we moved on to Mr. Brandon Hay, who explained not only the work that they are doing with coral reef gardening, but also providing education to the fishermen on the ground and other people to understand what is happening on Jamaica's mangroves and their climate issues that they're having there. I also want to just point out that one thing that Courtney Rattray, His Excellency, shared about the importance of climate information within the local infrastructure of government. When you have local governments who understand this, they can really support the NGOs on the ground. And then we heard, of course, from Mr. Glaston White about what's really happening with the fishermen and the difference between the coral reefs and the fish, the actual fishing itself, the importance of fishermen being able to get to market to provide for customers that has been hampered by the COVID-19, and also seeing more grassroots structure on the ground support for fishermen. We then go on to Ms. Martina Dorigo, who really brought it home with the adaptation finance and how adaptation can be used to scale up climate innovation, even help with gender equality with women on the ground within the climate innovation itself, and how those things can be scaled up. We then went on to Mr. Paul Smith, who further shared how it was great for him to have the opportunity to bring this from UNEP's finance area and banks and so forth, to be able to connect with the fishermen on the ground and to connect with the NGOs on the ground that are from Jamaica that are actually having this happen in real time. So with that said, the banking industry through Mr. Smith had the opportunity to connect in this way and show how insurance would actually help in this way with an area like what Mr. Glaston White is dealing with and what Mr. Brandon Hay is dealing with, because then it can measure the risk and assessment that is going on there. So with that said, I thank everyone for being a part here. And I want to just mention one thing. I think Zdenka's information of what she provided would work very well with CCAM of Brandon Hay and also very well with the fishermen on the ground, because we're dealing with Costa Rica and Jamaica really doing some powerful on the ground work to ensure that their countries are in play. And if these two could get together, it could provide a model that would move other countries forward in this area. And this is what happens when you bring like the NGO Committee on Finance and Development and its co-partners together, and the ambassadors, and then Alan, who brought together with us the NGOs on the ground. This is what real partnership looks like. And then we bring the banking areas together with the Adaptation Fund and also Mr. Paul Smith from the UNEP Finance. This truly is a multi-stakeholder approach. It deals with citizens on the ground, it impacts citizens, and most importantly, it impacts our biodiversity and our planet. With that said, I'd like to turn it over to our NGO chair, Miss Anita Williams. Miss Anita Williams, thank you so much, Anita.
Anita Thomas.
I'm sorry,
Thank you,
Anita.
Gail.
Sorry about that.
No worries. Thank you so much. Thank you, Gail, for that powerful closing remarks. And I will merely thank everybody. Thank you, Ambassador Carasso and Ambassador Rattray, for partnering with the NGO Committee on Financing for Development on this event. Support from member states is crucial to the work that we do as NGOs. We're deeply grateful for your continued interest and availability to engage with the NGO Committee on Financing for Development. Thank you. I also thank each of the panelists for the insights you shared, which has allowed the participants of this session to delve deeper into the technicalities of financing a more robust and stronger, holistic and greener response to pandemic recovery. Last but not least, congratulations and thanks to the members of the working group on climate finance of the NGO Committee on FfD, Marvi, Martha, Quinn, Fred, Gail, Alan, and Yvonne for your commitment, advocacy, and team efforts in organizing this incredibly valuable event. And I welcome all of you to join our panel discussion on the findings from the committee's grassroots level research to assess the extent to which the Addis Ababa Action Agenda and Paris Agreement have effectively translated to the ground, especially to the grassroots communities from the lens of climate finance, social protection, and digital and financial inclusion. We conducted this survey in 9 countries, and it was now 7 of our member organizations participated in it. The event will take place tomorrow at 7:30 a.m. by Zoom. I have posted the link to the chat. I will thank you all for joining, and I will close with a quote from the Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. Saving our planet, lifting people out of poverty, advancing economic growth, these are one and the same fight. We must connect the dots between climate change, water scarcity, energy shortages, global health, food security, and women's empowerment. Solutions to one problem must be solutions for all. Thank you all for joining us.
One thing, Anita, we wanted to first thank you and acknowledge you for all of the work that you continually do with this committee. We would not have gotten this far without your continued leadership. Thank you ever so much.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Gail. You're so kind. Thank you very much.